you, Mary. Thank you for being able to pronounce my name. That's always nice to see that. Yes, I'm here to talk about, today, talk about managing a widely distributed team. So my name is Dirkjan Bussink. I work as a principal engineer at GitHub. I'm going to talk about a few things. The title has a few things in there. There's the word managing, so it means, some of the things are going to be more general, but how do you apply them to a more distributed team? There's the word widely. What comes into play when you don't have people like within the same country or the same continent, but across different places? What are the additional concerns? What are the things that you can do to kind of like make your life easier? And of course, the word distributed. So not having everyone in the same office. What are some of the things that you can do to help improve and make sure that you have a happy and productive team and people working together to achieve great things. So yeah, as I said, I work for GitHub. We're a pretty known sticker company. Also do sometimes Git hosting. Apparently interesting enough for other companies to buy us, but I'm not going to talk much about that today. So one thing I do want to mention is that for people who've looked at the schedule in the past, I had a different title at that time than I have now, because part of that is because of a few reasons. The team that I'm working on has grown a lot in the last half year. We've gone from 10 people to almost 30 people, so a lot of new people, and it basically meant that originally, as an engineering manager, I was doing people management, also managing some of the managers on the team, but also was still involved in some of the higher level, like technical discussions and things like that. And as the team has grown, that became less and less tenable and doable. So part of that is that we split up the team. We hired additional managers to help us out on the people management side, which means that these days I'm more focusing on the technical leadership part. So that's why that changed. So I think Mary already touched on it a little bit about why would you even want a distributed team? Why would you want to work on a widely distributed team? And I think for me, that's something that, if I compare it to when I started out as a developer, when I started out in college and all those things, I never realized or I never thought about the way that I would be working today, working with people across the world through the internet, through all these new tools and video conferencing and whatnot, that would be a viable way of working these days. And I think that that's only going to continue. So it means that if you as a team, as a leader, as a company want to work with great and amazing talent, you're not going to find them all in one place anymore. They're going to be around the world. Technology is opening up more and more access to people, also in areas where it wasn't in the past. So there's more and more people in all these places that are amazingly talented engineers that you would want access to. And the only, it's not going to be viable to have everyone fly into one place. Not everyone wants to move. Do you really want to pay a lot of money to have everyone in San Francisco? So So in that sense, I think it's a necessity that as a company, maybe not everyone wants to always work in a distributed team. There are people who prefer working in an office. I don't think that's going to go away, but I think that every company that's more than just a few people is going to have to face the fact that in order to further grow, they're going to have to adopt ways of working like this and doing these things. So first, some additional context. I want to talk a little bit about some information about our team, just to create a little bit of idea of what the situation that we're in. And I think it was already mentioned earlier today, is all the things I'm talking about here are going to be things that are working for us, that are things that we feel are helpful for us, but it doesn't mean they're going to translate one-on-one and you can just apply them blindly to your own teams. It's important to understand the team dynamics. It's important to understand all those things. So even yesterday when I came here, it's as you go on a conference, people ask you the question hey, where are you from? What do you do? So it's I live in Amsterdam and I work for GitHub. It's do they have an office there? It's yeah, we do have an office there, but it's mostly sales-oriented, so there's only a few engineers. Nobody else from my team lives in Amsterdam. So that's kind of how it works. So currently, today, we're 28 people. I think it might actually be one or two more now because we're in the middle of hiring additional people. But Those 28 people came originally from, well, it depends on how you count, 5 different continents. You can also count them as 7. I realized that the only one we're missing is Antarctica, but as far as I know, there's no humans that are actually born there normally, so I would say we got a pretty good coverage. Today, people work from 11 different countries in the world. So I got a little map. So it shows, we got people in the US from coast to coast. We got people in Europe. We have somebody in Africa. So we have people in a pretty wide region. So it's not that, I think if we look at time zones, I think we have 6 or 7 specific time zones. The biggest time difference is 10 to 11 hours. If you go from Kenya here to the US West Coast. So people then ask me, is this, this must be very hard. And the way I see it is that actually, if you look at distributed teams in general, I see this as the easy mode. And the reason I see this as the easy mode is because of how spread we are, everyone is in a very similar position. There's no advantage over being in one of these locations that gives you much of a leg up compared to the environment you're in, the people you're in, the people you work with daily. So I think actually the struggle that a lot of companies have that kind of don't work like this today, but are interested, is that they have a situation, an environment like this, where they have an office where there's a number of people, and they have a few people that are, scattered around, that they've recently hired on the team. And it's hard, because what you have to do at that point is you got to work to maybe break down even some patterns of the way that people are working in an office. Because the things that you do in an office might not translate very well in a way that's inclusive and accepting of people who are not there. So one of the very simple things you could do is something like this, is everyone in a meeting is a talking head. So basically what you say is instead of doing a thing where we have a video conferencing room, there's 5 people sitting in there, and there's people calling in on a screen on the side. No, we put everyone on the same place. We put everyone in the same situation where you're on your own machine, you're on your own video chat, and that's what and it also allows you for adopting things like conventions of maybe somebody raises their hand, unmutes their microphone if they want to talk. So it kind of creates a much more equal and a much more equal environment where everyone can better participate and be part of all these conversations. So this is one thing. I realized I was looking at Twitter last, of course, I don't know if every speaker does it, but everyone tweaks their slides to the last minute. So this is actually from yesterday, from when Slack was down. And it's funny because when I read this, the thing I thought about, especially in the context of what I'm talking about today, is so a lot of people, even though as a joke they say, "Oh, we are anxious now that I have to talk to people face to face," it makes you realize a lot of people are already interacting in a way with each other, even in an office, where it might as well not be in the same office, because you're not patting somebody on the back and trying to disturb them, but you send them a Slack message "Hey, can you help me out?" or all those kind of things that people are already doing and kind of adopting that are very well suited for working in a distributed team. So another example I have of that is was my onboarding experience when I started GitHub. So I've been there for a while. It was 4.5 years ago. And I had somebody who's my onboarding buddy. And even though we were, he had a little task/project, which included me taking down a staging environment on the first day, which is a good way to start your job. But what it meant is that I was working with him, and even though we were sitting literally at the same table, we were talking with each other in chat. We were not talking in person. And the thing that kind of opened my mind, and the way I saw it, hey, this is how this works, and this is how we can make this work, is that we were talking about this problem of why did I kill this environment? Why is it down? And somebody across the country in the US on the East Coast realized what was going on, and was able, because he saw our conversation, was able to help out and jump in and say hey, this is what's going on. So this is another part of push those conversations into the public. Put them in a place where people can read, people can help out, and people can interact, and people can create those kind of like interactions that are really helpful and useful. So I talked a lot about like team setup, distribution, like how that works, but I think there's one really big aspect that I want to spend a bunch of time on talking about because I think it's really, really important. And it's something that it matters for every team. Like, independent if you're working in an office, if you're distributed, if you're across different time zones or not, like, doesn't matter. This is like a key part that I think is part for every manager. But I think the difference is that when you work on a very distributed team, you have to be much more explicit about how to do that. And the topic I'm talking about is psychological safety. So I don't know if people here read the Google research about this, and they talked about like what aspects of a team determine if a team is successful or not. And the biggest aspect they found, the most important aspect, the thing that was the biggest indicator if a team was successful, is the team was feeling psychologically safe. So, that means that people feel free to speak up when they disagree with something. People feel empowered to do so. For example, if you go back to yesterday, someone was talking about code review. People feel and people do code review in a way where it's like they are not attacking the person, and they focus on, as a team, getting better at what they're doing instead of turning it into a fight. So all that psychological safety and feeling safe and feeling like you can you can be honest at work and do those things, that is really key to your team. And I think one of the things that if you're in a distributed team is that suddenly a lot of things that might happen serendipitously in an office, you now have to work for as a leader. You now have to do explicitly. You now have to be deliberate about. So it kind of like starts off with getting everyone together. So hopping on a plane and flying to a place in the world where you're meeting up and you're going to talk with each other and do that. But that's not it. Like, you can't just like, hey, let's all fly there together and everything magically happens. It doesn't work that way. There's a few things. You got to do this regularly. You got to be predictable. It has to be part of your way of working. You got to have a budget for it. It has to be part of your normal thing. So yes, it means that you might need more travel money and budget for that, but that is kind of like the part that comes with the deal of building a team like this. And use the time that you have together planned and well. Don't just go together and be together and just think of like, oh, whatever happens, it's fine. No, be explicit. Like, what do you want to use this time for when you're together? Because it's both an expensive in the sense of money and time, but also a very high bandwidth situation where you are together. So use that. Use that as your advantage. So one of the things you could do, for example, is look at your long-term strategy. What is it that we want to achieve the next time that we were together in like half a year or a year? Where do we want to be at that point? What do we want to move forward with? Which direction do we want to go? Does our team structure still fit? Maybe for us, this was a big discussion at our last one because we went from 10 people to 25 at that point. So is that still suitable? Or is the way that we're structured as a team still work? Or do we got to iterate and change that? Work on your way that you collaborate together. So work on the way that you might work together as a team, but also work on the way like how you work with other teams. Like, do we get frustrated by other teams? Are we frustrating other teams? So like, think about those things, work on those, and iterate on those. I think that is also very important in these kind of events to be deliberate about. Another thing is, for example, if we want to hire more people, talk about that. What does our process look like? How do we follow a strategy for that? In short, don't go together and do your day-to-day work, because your day-to-day work is better suited if you're sitting at home or in your home office or in a co-working space or whatever people use as their preferred work environment, because that's probably more comfortable. Like, even if you're in a conference and there's like maybe there's a work emergency that happens here while you're here, there's an outage or you need to solve something and help out something, you're not going to be as productive and as happy about that compared to working for your own environment. Maybe the Wi-Fi doesn't work, who knows? So don't do that. Don't spend this time to be like, oh, we're just going to work on our day-to-day thing because it's going to be fine. But the other part of it is also do things that are not work activities. A lot of time, like when people work in an office, when people work in the same place, what you see is that, sometimes they might say like, hey, let's grab dinner tonight with the team impromptu. Or, maybe there's karaoke fans on the team that like to shamelessly sing. Not talking about anyone specific here, but might be me. Anyway, so do those things. Plan for them. It starts off with a very basic thing, like you grab dinner together. Maybe not every night, because maybe people also want to have some room, but definitely plan for them. Build social capital with your team. Talk with them. Create this environment where it's not only about work. So this is a picture from an activity we did, which was we did volunteering. So this is, I don't know if people recognize, it's probably hard to recognize. This is actually from code.org. So it's like a way that we went to a school in Amsterdam with kids from an underrepresented background and help them and teach them the basics of coding. So, like code.org, it has a way, like you have a Minecraft avatar. What you do is like you learn the basic steps of instructions, tell it what to do. As you go through it, you get access to things like conditionals, loops, and those kind of things to kind of like control your avatar in this world and finish a puzzle. It's really interesting. It's really fun. Like we got feedback from, I got feedback from like people on the team who were like, yeah, this is great. It brought interesting challenges because, of course, these kids, like they speak Dutch. They have a few lessons of English, so they know a few words here and there. So yeah, it's also an interesting communication channel and like signing with your hand and your feet about like how do I teach somebody this. It was really, people really enjoyed it. We also saw that, we got great feedback from like the teachers. There were kids who they knew up front like, oh, they're super excited about this, going to love it. But we also saw kids where it's like, hey, even as a teacher, people said like, I didn't realize that she would be so into this and enjoy this so much. Like she wouldn't even know upfront herself that this was a thing that she was interested in. So doing those kind of things really makes the team bond and the way that you work with people, I think, a lot stronger and makes it really, really great. Another thing we've done is, for example, like we made Dutch pancakes together, just cooked dinner together. Oh, I see people applauding. It's fine. Yeah, and there's a slight London reference there at the top for people who might. Anyway, so yeah, it's like do those things where it's like build the community. Like it's kind of like building community. It's kind of like doing, maybe you have your local user group event, unless this time it's actually your own team because you need to do some other things. So things we also did was we did lightning talks. Everyone talked for 5 minutes about any topic they wanted. Like some people talked about the farm that they grew up in. Some people talked about how they were doing volunteering work as a firefighter. Other people talked about their favorite retro gaming project. Like anything goes, so people can talk about all those different things and show a little bit about themselves and what they bring to work. But do tell people that it's going to be tiring. They're going to be exhausted after this. I've heard people talk to me and like, hey, my partner says this sounds like a vacation. I try to really get them out of that idea because, no, it's definitely not going to be a vacation. When you're back, you're going to be exhausted because it's going to be very intense. I found people want to do that. Like even people who are more introverted, I've seen they want to participate and want to be part of it because it's not an opportunity they have every day. So people want to use the most of it, but it also means that it's very tiring. So this is all fun and good, but what do you do afterwards? Because you can't live and build a team on meeting each other once or twice every year. So you got to keep talking. You got to stay in touch and keep your conversations human that you have with people. So as a leader, as a manager, continue to build this trust and continue to build this relationship in one-on-ones. And do this regularly. It's like very easy if you are in a team where you're distributed, and it's easy to say like, hey, I'm not feeling like it today. Like you don't have to disappoint a person face-to-face that you don't want to talk to them. Maybe you feel like you don't have much, like everything is going super smooth. They're doing the work they need to do. They're working on their career goals, like they're working on their personal development, and you feel like, hey, they're really kicking ass and doing great. Still talk to people. Always have that list of questions in your back pocket about how to improve, how to get feedback, how to get better, both yourself as a leader and and how to improve your team. So keep talking. Like we do it at least once a week. Talk to a person in person, face to face, in a video chat to keep that going. Also do non-video work chats. So not every meeting has to. Well, it's not a meeting. That's the key part. It's in the sense that, hey, at this time of day, once a week, twice a week, we just start up our video conferencing tool and we just hang out. We talk about all kinds of random things from, we have people from all these different countries, so we can talk about, which country is screwing up their local politics in which way today, or also the World Cup, from very serious to the lighter things. You can talk about those things and discuss them and see faces. It's like talking at the coffee machine. It's like doing that, but being explicit about it and planning for it and doing that work. So talking about the coffee machine or the water cooler or however you want to call it, also do it virtually in the sense that in chat, like whether you use Slack or HipChat or other tool, I don't really care that much about. It's more about not everything you say there is going to be work-related and has to be work-related. Like, even a few days ago, I was trying to sign up for a website that had a on-paste return false event handler, which was breaking my password manager. So I had to hack the website to fill in my generated password and all this. So I was very frustrated by this and wanted to complain. But yeah, what if you want to complain and you're sitting there at home and you don't have a physical person, or you're not in an office, a physical person to complain? Just complain in chat. And people chimed in as yeah, that's super frustrating and that's bad. And it just helps you vent a little bit. And it can also be very positive, hey, people sharing pictures of a wedding they went to last weekend, which was where they had an amazing outfit and looked really great. And just share those and do those, share those with the team and show that you're more than just a person. I've even been to the place where I was rubber ducking with myself in our team chat. I wasn't expecting anyone to answer it, but it's more of a talking to myself and doing that and trying to solve a problem. One thing I think is very important if you're a very widely team, though, is be aware of your time zones. And by that, I don't mean do something that works best for everyone all the time, because that usually screws over the same people every time. So if you're a team with a large majority in the US, and you have a few people in Europe, for example, don't always make it only US friendly, because hey, 10 out of the 13 people are going to be happy with this time, because the same three people are going to be frustrated every time. So yes, it means that if you're in the US West Coast, you have a meeting at 8 a.m. That's kind of the thing that you have to accept and that you have to work on and share as a burden as a team in that sense. So that brings me to the last thing that really applies more to the widely distributed teams, and that is asynchronous communication. So one of the things, because you can't meet all the time if you're very far apart, if you have a 9-hour, 10-hour time difference, it is hard to ad hoc jump into a meeting. So I always tell people, I'm happy to go into a meeting, but usually give me a day or two, because we got to plan this, because I won't be, the time that works for you probably won't work for me. So what is the first thing? And this is the thing, I saw somebody talk about, don't repeat yourself is a very bad tactic for a manager, which I completely agree with. So again, talk in public. Talk in a public place about what you're doing, what's happening, and what's going on. So I compare, for example, ideally, if you as a company use Slack, they have actually an interesting metric that shows you how many public versus private messages are being sent. Ideally, you do more public than private messages. The way I compare it, if you talk to a person in Slack, one-on-one in the private message, it's the same as, even if it's about a topic that's not sensitive or anything like that, if you're in an office, you wouldn't say like, oh, if I bump into somebody at the coffee machine and we talk about something, and maybe a third person drops in and shares their insights and ideas. What you don't do in an office, like not for every conversation, you're not going to jump into a soundproof booth where nobody can hear you. So don't always do that. Don't also do that in an asynchronous in a textual environment. Talk in public. Talk in, like first at GitHub, we use GitHub ourselves a lot. Talk in issues. Talk in pull requests. And if you use Slack, talk in public channels. People, it encourages collaboration, and people can jump in and help out and promote. And it also promotes transparency. So you're showing what you're doing, you're showing what's going on. Another thing you can do, status updates. Is it really useful to have a meeting to do status updates? The way I see it is that often people use meetings as a crutch. What I mean by that is either their experiences has shown, like for example, like if I ask people for status updates in an issue or a document or anything like that, it doesn't happen. So that's why I schedule a meeting to force it. That might work if you're in a similar time zone. If a team works and a team is fine with that, like don't change it. Like I'm not saying you have to change this. But one thing to think about is that do we really need the meeting, or are we using the meeting as a way to force people to share this information? Because that might mean we need to work with people and help them and educate them on like, how do we want to do this? Like, how can we share our updates asynchronously, and how can we do those things without having to force a meeting and do that every time? It also means you don't get instant gratification. So if you have a question for somebody, you won't get an immediate answer. Give it at least a workday. Like for any important question, a workday is the bare minimum of time you need to allow people to answer this. Even if it's urgent, and even if you feel like it needs the quickest possible answer. Probably more, ideally more than one workday. But be aware of that. So it also means that you got to work on unblocking people. So if you know that somebody's going to wait for something that you need to do, be on time with that. Because if they need it on Friday, it might mean that you need to wrap it up on Wednesday so that they have Thursday to work on it because of time zones and time differences and things like that. So be on time on those things. But also, don't block yourself. And this is also something that is really something that you can help engineers and others on your team with in order to develop those strategies. Like one of the things that people ask me, like, hey, what do I need to do to be able to work successfully on this team is like, you got to be able to if you work on a project, you got to maybe there's like 2-3 different things, and work on those. And if you push up your code and you're waiting for a code review, you can't like just sit there and wait because that person might be asleep or already off for the day. So be aware of that. Have other tasks within your project that are fairly independent that you can move on and you can push forward as well. So think of your work in that way, where you can like distribute those things and work like that. And overcommunicate. Again, repeating, communicate, communicate, communicate. I think a lot of problems where if you look at any postmortem, blameless postmortem about how things went down, you can always find somewhere the communication broke down. Somebody forgot to tell something. Somebody forgot something somebody said. Something was communicated in a place where people didn't look. All those things create those problems. So communicate. By the time you feel you might be communicating too much, like you are communicating too much, you might be just communicating enough. And it also means remind people, if you have a team meeting and there's important things, mention them. But then also mention them in a status update, in asynchronous flows, mention them in your chat, remind people in one-on-ones, like use all those things and tools to do that. But also use restraint. By that I mean be aware of how and when you communicate. So as a manager, set your boundaries, like maybe like for me, for example, like I'm fine with people sending me a message at any time of the day, but I won't answer them. Like I have my phone on Do Not Disturb when I'm asleep, so it's fine to send me a message, but I won't answer it until I get to it. That's the expectation to set. Or maybe there's people on your team who if you send them a message when it's their evening time and they might read it, they could get very anxious. Like if you have critical feedback, wait for it until they are online so that you can have a direct back and forth about it. Don't send them something after hours, leaving them anxious for the whole night, giving them a bad night's sleep, when it's something that you could have also told the next day. And also, stop working in the evening. It's very important, especially for me. Like, I'm in Europe, a lot of the teams in the US. It's easy to be like, hey, it's late, it's 6 p.m., the US is right awake, actively working, they're asking me questions, I just got to stop my day. You'll be the first thing I get back tomorrow, but not now. Because hardly anything is urgent. Nothing is really like, oh, I got to drop everything for it. There's a great German expression, durch einfach liegen lassen erledigt. And I think somebody talked about it earlier at this conference about not doing something is also a decision. And sometimes that's actually a very good decision, because you can use it, and the problem might just not be a problem anymore. Something that may seem urgent today, if you wait a week, it's like, why were we so fed up about that? Why were we so worried about that? And the last thing I wanted to mention is use the way that your team works through different time zones. You can use it to your advantage, because at the times there is an urgent incident. I don't know if people remember Heartbleed, remember Shell Shock. Our great advantage in those situations was that we could hand it off. Like, people started remediation, hand it off to the next team in a different time zone, so we could wrap it up quicker than we could have done otherwise, or we'd have burned out people working entire huge long days. So recap. If you build a distributed team, the first thing you got to realize and accept that everyone is distributed. Even people who are in the same office have to accept this and work like that. The second thing is work hard on building team bonds. Be deliberate, be explicit. Enable asynchronous workflows so that people can work in a way without needing synchronous work all the time, and use the power of distributed teams to really build a happy and effective team. Thank you.